Welcome to the Life Curation Podcast. I'm your host, Andrina Tisi. Together, we will explore thoughts, inspirations, and conversations that feed our soul, spark the mind, and nourish the body. Thank you so much for being here to learn and grow, and for walking this journey called life with me. Hi there. Thank you so much for being here on the Life Curation Podcast. Whether you're returning or it's your first time, I'm really happy for you to tune in. And in today's episode, I'm happy to have Eric Hartman back on the podcast. 2 weeks ago, he and my dear friend Niki Inglis, also his partner, so Eric and Niki as a couple, were here together and we talked about radical communication. The link to that episode is in the show notes, or you can simply go back 2 episodes on your podcast app and you will find it. Today, Eric and I talk about the benefits of men gathering in a group and why he started a men's group. The connection in between was a little shaky, so the sound at times is not so great, but I do hope it will not be too bothersome for you. What motivated me to have Eric back on the podcast with that topic is that I feel over the last few years, women's circle have become very popular, and there will be a future episode on that topic as well. I, however, feel very few people talk about men's group, so I'm really thrilled to bring this topic to the podcast. A little bit more about Eric. So he was born in New York and grew up in Vancouver. He's a passionate elementary school teacher, and he enjoys using music and puppets as a core strategy in his pedagogy. Other passions include cycling, sailing, languages, traveling, and being in the mountains. Besides being a founding member of a men's discussion group, as he will talk about, he has attended several men's weekend retreats. He is president of the Pacific Bluegrass and Old Time Music Society and has been part of several performing music bands. Eric has a BA in Religious Studies with a focus on Judaism, a Bachelor in Elementary Education, and a Master in Music Education. He has an adult son and 3 adult stepdaughters, so Niki's daughters. Before we hop over to my conversation with Eric, if you are or you know someone who has a message to share, or if you have a topic you would like to hear about, let me know. I always look for amazing guests and topics that resonate with you to bring onto the podcast. And if you like this or other episodes, please hop over to iTunes, scroll all the way down and hit those 5 magic stars. This really, really helps for people to find the podcast more easily. But now, with no further ado, let's listen in to our conversation. Great. Well, thank you for being back, Eric. It's good to see and hear you again.
You're welcome. Hi.
So, like last time, we're starting with the 5 this or that questions. So, you know, it's not the same ones as last time. So, I'm just going to hit you right away.
Okay.
Vegetables or fruits?
Fruit.
Piercing or tattoo?
Tattoo.
Bath or shower?
Shower.
City or countryside?
City.
Classical or modern art?
Modern.
Good. That was fast.
Well, this time I went with the truth instead of the wishful part. Wishful thinking.
And today was a truth?
Today was the truth.
Nice. The truth sometimes is easier.
Truth is easier.
So, not too long ago, when was it exactly that you started a men's group?
It was the fall of 2019, so about a year and a half ago.
Yeah. And what motivated you to start that?
Well, I had been in a men's group before. I guess it started when I went to a men's weekend. A friend of mine, a woman friend, told me about this weekend that men get together, and it was kind of a extended retreat, but it was here in the city, and it was all day, like 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. for 2.5 days, and it was just men, and it was just really talking about some of the challenges that men face in modern society, and how for most men we kind of go through life with this curtain over us, this sort of facade, and we rarely, if ever, kind of break through that, even to ourselves. So there's a lot of, it was pretty intense, and it was really new for me. At first, I actually thought I was very skeptical. I thought, what is this? Is some sort of a cult? I actually went to like an information meeting, and I was like, okay, this still might be a cult, but I'm willing to give it a shot. It was helpful that it was in the city. I don't even think I would have gone if I had to go traveling to some
Yes.
weird retreat in the wilderness. So it was very much like I was very sort of cautious but optimistic. So but open minded. Anyway, it was legit, and it was really eye opening for me, and it sort of went to some places that I hadn't really ever, that I always knew that I was interested in. For many years, I had felt like I hadn't had men friends. I didn't have many men friends to begin with, and those that I did tended to be, I felt, just not that satisfactory as far as the depth of our relationship. I had friends that I would do sports with, and we'd do things with, play music with, and go to movies with, and go for drinks, but never really, not never, but almost never really talked about really what I considered to be some of the deeper things that mattered to my life. And the few that I had didn't live in the same city as me. So um, after this weekend, I started to attend a weekly men's group meeting
Hmm.
in somebody's garage, and it was just a circle, and it would often be led by somebody and sort of bring some content of some topic that was relevant, that was important, and we would discuss it. And I felt that was, at that time in my life, was very valuable. And I didn't really have that much to contribute. Well, I didn't really contribute much. I was a bit cautious, and I wasn't really ready to be fully honest, and sort of, I didn't really trust the men that much. There wasn't that much emphasis on trust and confidentiality. People would come and go, and there'd be, like, guests, and people would show up, and they'd say, oh, this is, everything we say today is confidential, but that's about the end of it. And didn't really feel like that much of a safe place. So I listened, and it was really interesting, but after a while, some of the men that led it moved away, and then it sort of turned into more of just like a bitch session, which is not what I wanted. Like, just a place to complain. And there's a place for that, I guess, but it wasn't what I wanted. So I left that group, and for many months, for a couple of years, several years, I didn't have a place like that. But I knew that I really missed it, and I wanted it, and I had a vision in my mind of something that I wanted that was more sort of consistently really powerful and deep and meaningful and authentic. And so eventually, I decided to start my own. And so I bought a book called The Men's Group Manual by Clyde Henry, and it's a very matter of fact, practical guide to how to start a men's group. And it goes step by step and talks about the different kinds of groups. There's some of them are faith based. Actually, if you Google men's group online, I found a lot of religious groups, a lot of Christian groups, when they talk about prayer and faith and stuff. And then there's ones for, particular men with particular life situations, like divorced men or fathers, or
Yes.
you know, there are various types of profiles. But I just wanted one sort of very general, where we were willing to really sort of delve into some more personal issue, and not issues, but in more personal questions. So anyway, so I followed the step by step guide, and I made posters, and Niki helped me write out um, the text. And it was funny because she was convinced that less text, like she's kind of in the social media realm, right? So less text, all about the meme and the catchy image and stuff like that. Not a lot of words, because people are going to be turned off by too much reading and all that, which is true. But I didn't want to have to interview many people. Like I think one of the things about the men's group that people don't understand is, and it's kind of a twist on the normal marketing world. Like normally you want as many people as you can get, right? You want to have as many customers, you want to have as many people in your retreat, you want to have as many people in your lesson, you have as many students in your classes, whatever. The more, the better. But this was a very different idea, right? A men's group of the kind that I wanted was small,
Yeah.
and I only wanted people that really were committed to being there. And I think it kind of messes up or it puts upside down the sort of general idea, right? So I had all these words on my poster, like, this is the kind of things we've been talking about, and are you ready for this kind of commitment and challenge, and like, you have the courage, Like, he's like, nobody's going to read that, right? And I was like, okay, that's good. I mean, I don't want, if people read the first paragraph and like, what the hell is this? Then that's fine. Like, I don't want them, right? So, and it's interesting because when I don't even hardly ever mention even to men that I'm in a men's group, because they don't really know what to think of it. And I think sometimes they're offended that I don't invite them to join, because again, people always say, oh, the more the merrier, right? The more the better. But that's not, like, people have to be really ready for this. They have to want it already. It's almost like they have to want it already, So anyway, so I did that process. I put and of course it was in person. It wasn't over Zoom at the time. So I wanted to be local. I didn't want to have people that had to travel a long way, and I didn't want to have to travel a long way. So I just put the signs up around the neighborhood, maybe a dozen signs. I went to bookstores and cafes, and in the neighborhood we have these like public little boards where people can put ads and so on. And interestingly, and I also put them on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was, on Facebook, I got a lot of views, a lot of thumbs up. It's like, yay, good idea. And nobody was seriously interested. Some of the men would, like, a few answers I got from men were like, oh yeah, I'm interested. And then I said, okay, can you send me something to tell me about, like here are some questions, tell me why you're interested. Just really basic questions. Nobody answered.
Oh,
Like,
interesting.
it's like they think it's a good idea, but they weren't willing to go the next level, like to make some effort, right? Which was the test that I wanted to. Anyway, but what's funny is that the women who saw the ad were like, yeah, great idea. I want to tell my boyfriend. I want to tell my husband. I want to tell. It's like, yeah, that's not the way I want this to go. I don't want a man to be there because his girlfriend told him to be there. That's not going to work, right? So anyway, end of the story was I ended up getting a response from 8 or 9 men, all locally,
Good.
all to my poster, and none to Facebook through Facebook. So I interviewed each one on one. We went to a cafe and I just asked them some questions, and I mean, I'm sure they had the same feeling, like maybe this is a weird cult like I had. And and then after, I sort of had a deadline. I didn't want it to go on forever. I didn't want to have people coming all the time. Like, I wanted to have a start with a group and make that group the group, and not keep having people coming in and joining all the time. Anyway, so eventually we ended up starting, and we most of the men that met me the first period, except for 2, ended up in the group, and they're still there.
That's
And
amazing.
a year and a half later, and a couple of them even had to take a break for professional reasons, but then they came back. So I guess that's a long story about how I started it, but it was very organic process. And I have to say that the process in the book really worked. Like, some of the stuff in the book is really counterintuitive. Like I said, like, you don't want to have lots of people answering. Like, I wanted to have people self censor, right? I wanted them to read the poster and say, hey, this is not for me, rather than me having to take my time interviewing them and then figuring out that this is not for me. You know what I mean? So I really think that it worked out quite well.
And so you stuck with the same people, did I understand that right? So it's the same group of men.
We have 7 men now in the group, and it's the same 7 that we started out with the very first day.
And I think what you mentioned 2 words which really came out to me is trust and confidentiality, and to provide a safe space, right? And I think when you, of course, have that close group, you get to know each other, and of course with getting to know each other, it's more easily to start to open up. Like what you mentioned, it took some time for you in the group you were in to share and be more kind of there, and sharing your part as well, because you don't feel that safe, maybe, right? And then of course if you stay in a group and it's the same people, then that safety is more there.
That's right. And I mean, another part of this book, the men's group manual, is once you've got your group, it actually guides you through the first 8 meetings.
Cool.
What to do. And we, obviously you don't have to, but we decided as a group that we wanted to stick with this book. We reviewed it and we all got a copy, and we thought, okay, let's follow this process. And honestly, some of the times we didn't want to, like some of the it's a bunch of exercises, basically trust building exercises, communication skills. It's really designed to create the skills for a group to function. Conflict resolution skills, what to do when there's inevitably there's going to be conflict when you start to go into some more sensitive topics, what to do. Yeah. And there's a lot of those kind of things, and they're exercises. They feel a bit fake and contrived, like where you talk to a partner and then you say something for a minute, and then you take turns, and active listening, and so it feels a bit contrived. But we really committed to that because I think we all recognize that the skills were valuable, and they were, and we use them all the time, and I don't even think we often know about them, and I think they've also filtered into our personal lives, some of those skills, and so it was really valuable. And in fact, I think as I was skimming the book again to prepare for this conversation, and I thought, hey, we should really go back to some of those exercises, just to do them again to see how they feel now a year and a half later. So anyway, they're designed to build that sense of trust and those skills, and that's something that first group I was in didn't do. And I think that there was definitely something lacking from that. I mean, I appreciated the openness. Like the man that was running that really just wanted so many people to come and just experience that. But there was a cost. Like I said, it didn't really go as deep as I think it could have. So so that's what we tried to do. So now we've been together for a year and a half, 7 months later, and there is that trust. And then when we went to Zoom because of COVID, that was another question. Like, will we be able to maintain that? Like, back at the beginning, it's like we're all in different spaces and people are around, and I certainly, sometimes when there's people around me and like I don't feel that comfortable sharing necessarily personal things. On the other hand, it was complicated to find that time, basically in 2 hours where I had space to myself, right? A confidential space, and all the other men, the same, families and kids and so on. So it's a commitment. Like we really have to commit to that time and that space and that privacy. And a few times I've actually done it walking around the neighborhood with my headphones, or I went to a local school and
good idea.
Sponged off their Wi-Fi because I have a password for the school Wi-Fi because I work in the school system. So I stole their Wi-Fi and I just sat there in this courtyard and did you have to, or in the car. I've done it in the car sometimes.
Yeah.
So, so there are challenges like that.
So how often do you meet?
Every week.
Every week, yeah. Yeah, that
Yeah, we
is a commitment, yeah.
it's commitment, and I remember when I read that. So the book tells you, obviously the question is how often do you want this group to meet, and as much as I knew I wanted this group to exist, I was reluctant to commit to every week, even for my own life. That's a lot. That's one
It is a
night.
lot.
I mean, some people do in the morning, but I think for most of us who are working, the evening is in some ways better. So I was like, maybe every 2 weeks would be good. I didn't want to commit every week, even myself. But in the end, we decided to try every week. We did 90 minutes because that was what worked. One of the men had he had little kids to put to sleep, and I had like often actually Niki would leave. Niki would leave the apartment and go work in a cafe for an hour and a half, and I just didn't feel comfortable asking her to leave. Well, I didn't ask her to leave, but an hour and a half I thought was long enough, like the maximum time.
Mhm.
So we did 90 minutes. But then after a while, it just wasn't long enough. Like we just felt like we sort of have this schedule, this format we use, and it's just 90 minutes. It just felt like it was getting cut short. And of course, and with COVID, we didn't have to travel, and
Yeah.
so in some ways that makes it easier, right? We didn't have it was harder to find the space, but the time was easier. So we went to 2 hours every week, and that has been what we've been doing since. And that feels like the right amount of time.
Nice. And you touched on it a little bit when you started talking about your own experience, but I would like to go into a little bit more details. Why do you think it is important for men to gather amongst each other?
Well, I think men have men have been involved in communal groups for thousands of years. I mean, all throughout our evolutionary history, men would participate in rituals and spiritual rituals and in hunts and sports and tell stories. And the stories, these experiences were formative, and they defined their role in the community. And there were rites of passage for boys to turn into to be recognized as adults in the community, and this idea of the men's hut, and it was such a important thing. And women had the same type of experiences with women, and that experience has largely been lost in modern life. And men just don't have a place where we can be together and feel safe and not have to keep this facade. It's I don't know if women and even many men probably don't even know that men have this act, this image, this face, this mask that we put on all the time. And people talk about men having the world is made for men. It's easy, they get paid more, they get jobs more, they get, and that's all true. And women definitely, the modern changes in Western society are almost always positive, far more fair and far more equitable. So it's not about limiting women, but it's about having a safe place for men to just be able to communicate and not to have this mask. And the mask is often, I'm strong, I'm the protector, and I'm the helper. I'm the one that fixes everything, and and I don't want to show that I'm vulnerable. I don't want to show that I have fears or worries, and because if I do that, I'm weak, and it has to do with, I know last time when Niki and I were with you, we talked about polarity and this whole idea of men, or not necessarily men, but the masculine being this energy, this sort of strong energy, and men don't want to let that go because for lots of reasons, and we don't know how, and we were raised with the tools.
Yeah.
And it's even harder now with social media and Me Too movement, and like everything is so charged, everything, like people are so sensitive. If you say the wrong thing, you use the wrong pronoun, and people are like, oh, you're a misogynist and you're a sexist, and even though a lot of the underlying forces of those movements I think are really positive, men are just so scared to say the wrong thing. It's like it's a minefield. So it's even worse than ever, really, in a way of being able to be fully authentic and just to share things that could be interpreted or judged, right? I mean, you say one thing and then that's it. You're done. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important to have gender specific groups. And there's this idea of the macho, this sort of overly macho stereotype, and then there's the idea of the stereotype of this new age sensitive man who's all about emotions and feeling and crying, and they're both caricatures and they're both oversimplifications, and what we really are is much more complicated than that, and we have all of those elements. But popular culture just doesn't allow for the complexity. It's all oversimplifications and exaggerations, and it's very easy to poke fun, right, and to make fun of people and to tease. And that's the first thing that people would say. Oh, I'm in a men's group. Oh, what do you do? Do you go out into the woods and take your clothes off and paint yourself and howl at the moon? And it's just so easy, like all these images. And there's even a movie that came out a few years ago called Men's Group, I think.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, and I haven't seen it, but from what I could gather, it's that. Like, I mean, maybe it's okay actually, but all the images on TV and movies tend to be making fun of people that, especially men, right? Oh, they're just being pussies, basically. And why do they need that? I don't need a men's group. I got my shit together. And it's so not about needing. It's about wanting. It's about having the courage to face some of those questions and being authentic. And yeah, so I think those reactions tend to be out of a lack of understanding, and that's that mask, right? So I'm just trying to remember your question about what men needing that time together. Yeah, so I guess it comes back to that, like you said, the trust, and we're needing just a place to tell stories, a place to go deeper than just the usual things that we talk about all the time. Acceptance and support. It's also not about people being damaged and needing to be fixed. Like it's not therapy. And that's another thing that some people often think, oh, this is like a support group, right? So this is basically free therapy, which is not. I mean, it's therapeutic, but it's not therapy. None of us is trained as a counselor, as therapists, right? We're just regular men talking about regular stuff, and we have some skills that we built together. And in my first group there was even some real aggressive behavior. Like there was even one guy just basically tried to fight another guy. So I mean, that group wasn't as sophisticated. They didn't have those skills. They didn't work on those skills as much, so that may be partly why. But yeah, so we also talk about successes. Like every once in a while, because that's another thing that men often don't do is brag. I mean, there's the ones that do, and they brag all the time. Look how great I am, but it's not considered to be culturally acceptable, in polite society, to talk about one's successes. So every once in a while, we'll just have a session. We just talk about how well we did something, and something that was great, or some memory that we tend to not talk about because we want to keep things nice and polite all the time.
Yeah, I think
so it's all about all those things. It's about sharing stories. It's about challenges. It's about sharing fears. I mean, some of the issues, some of the really complicated things, like masculinity, right? Like that's kind of one of the core ideas. Like, what the hell is masculinity anyway? And how is it addressed in popular culture? And rape, you hear these words, rape culture and the toxic masculinity, and these they're so charged, and if you challenge them in public forum, then you're immediately attacked, right? But that's so it's really not helpful, because they deserve to be examined, and they deserve to be broken down and interpreted. Like, what the hell does it mean, toxic masculinity? Are men all rapists? Are men all aggressive, predators? Obviously, there's a problem with that idea, and yet it's often unquestioned. So that's the sort of thing that we talk about.
Yeah, I think it's really nice to have, I think, for both, right, men and women, or male and female, to have these spaces to feel, comfortable and safe, and feel that trust. And I think certain topics pertain more to, men, and some pertain more to women. And I think, and I would love your take on it. And you've kind of answered it already a little bit, but I think it is often perceived that men go into their cave and deal with their problem on their own, right? And we women, we call our girlfriends. And I think what you've just shared, that is that it's really helpful for men to do the same. It may not feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, it may not feel as natural. Is that true?
Well, I think it doesn't. Yeah, I think it doesn't feel natural, because we don't have the social tools and the social constructs and vehicles to do that. Like the rituals, right? I mean, it used to be totally normal, and in some places still is, where men get together. And now it feels awkward. Right now, if you're not going to a game, or watching the game, or going for beer or drinks or something, then it's weird, And so I think, like, this whole idea of a girls' night,
Yeah.
it's sort of normal. I mean, I'm sure there's issues with women too. I mean, I don't know what women talk about. I'm sure there's the same phenomenon in some cases, where women talk about, I guess, superficial things, and don't really talk about their deeper. And also, I think, from what I've understood anyway, from women that I've known, there's a lot of judging that goes on with women too, and there's people don't necessarily want to share their challenges, because in a way there's a sense of competition sometimes among women, and even friends, and there's a sense of almost like a Schadenfreude kind of like almost a secret enjoyment when a woman that they know or maybe are jealous of has some sort of success, and there's competition around appearance, and about money, and about relationships and children. And so it happens with women, I'm sure, as well. But I do think that women are more likely to talk to each other about their lives. That seems to be true to me in my experience. And they'll get together and they'll walk, and they'll share stuff. And, it doesn't necessarily go to some of those deeper places. And also, women, I think, often are more willing to be emotional and share their feelings. Like, that was a lot of the focus of those initial meetings in this book that guided us through this process, is how the hell do you talk about your feelings? Like, because men just don't talk about feelings very often. And so that is maybe one of the biggest differences between women and men. Men prefer to avoid talking about their feelings, and women, I think, are often sort of, in a very general sense, more comfortable doing that. I think there's a place for women to have a group where they talk about some of these things. Like, I think one of the things that this kind of men's group does, that I'm part of, is provoke each other. Like, we deliberately, I mean, and actually we don't do this as often as we could, where we really provoke each other to go into a deeper place and challenge these assumptions, because so many of the things we talk about are just reinforcing our stories. And it takes a real it takes courage to allow yourself to be provoked that way, and say, well, wait a minute, like, that's bullshit. You told me this, you told us this last week or last month, you're going to do this, or why haven't you done this? Like you said, this is your goal, and this is not serving you. anyway, those kinds of things where you challenge each other and don't just accept. I think that's one thing that women often do is just accept each other's like, go, you go, girl, and that sort of thing. It's always that cheerleader sort of positive thing, which, I mean, that's not a bad thing, but sometimes so often what we're doing is just reinforcing that our story, and sometimes that's not really the best. you know so maybe there's not that big of a difference between women and men's communication, but I think at the very minimum, women do get together and talk more, and there's more comfort around emotions and feelings, and being willing to share those, and not being judged in the same way. Although I think, like I said, there is judgment and those kinds of things as well.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the case that we women probably are more comfortable talking about our feelings and our emotions. I do think there is a lot of competition and sometimes toxic stuff amongst women happening too. But I think that's not necessarily a gender thing. It's just like human beings in a way, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I do think that communication or conversations are definitely different in mixed groups, which of course are also super beneficial than gender specific, like you mentioned. So what kind of topics, and maybe right now or over the past year and a half, do you feel have been very important for your group to talk about?
Well, like I said, so we've been together for about a year and a half, and the first probably 6 months it took us just to kind of work through that group. Maybe not quite 6 months, but a long time, longer than it said. Like it says, 8 meetings, and here's what you do the first 8 meetings. It took us a lot longer than that. Many of the meetings took 2 or even 3 weeks. So,
Yeah.
so a lot of time was invested in those exercises and building the skills and the trust. Then we went to a model where we would just take turns leading, because it's really like, nobody
Nice.
is the owner of this, even though I kind of started it. I'm no more the leader than anyone else. And so we just take turns. And so people bring topics that they find that they think would be helpful and interesting. So sometimes it's about health, breath work, that sort of thing. Sometimes we've done yoga. We've talked about relationships a lot, skills, challenges in relationship, children. That parenting comes up a lot. Issues around parenting, yes. Challenges, fatherhood. Most of us are fathers. Also, our own father. Our relationship with our fathers and how that relates to us, and some of the patterns we get into.
Nice.
We've talked about some of the sort of dominant or the famous mythologies around masculine. We haven't done this that much, but some of the men in my group are very knowledgeable in, like, Carl Jung and those kind of things. So Iron John, the book Iron John, and the mythologies around that. We talk about sex. We haven't really talked about money so much, but that certainly is a topic that could come up. Recently we started talking. Well, actually, we just decided that we felt like the meetings were getting a little bit too loose and not really going as deep as we would like. So we changed. We have a new book that we are using. It's called To Be a Man by Robert Masters, and it really works through chapter by chapter a lot of really important topics. And so we're going to use that as the source and kind of go through a cycle and read the chapter before and sort of use it as a starting point. But there's always time for men to talk about if something is really on their mind, or something pressing that they just really need to get off their chest, or they need some feedback on. So we're going to keep that element. But sometimes if you have too much of that sort of stuff, oh, this was my week and I did this and I did this, even though it's interesting and it helps us get to know each other, you end up feeling at the end of the meeting like I didn't really like this is such a valuable time. Like who has 2 hours
Yeah.
a week? You know, you got your job and you have your kids and your partner and everything else. Like to take 2 hours a week in this world in this time of our lives is really a big deal. And if
Oh yes.
it's not helpful, if it doesn't feel like you're really moving forward, even though it's easier, in the end, it's gonna go. You know, let's say it's not working for me, and I just don't want to spend that time. So it has to be moving us forward, but it's really hard. So it's a combination of like having the structures and having the discipline to go there every week. So this book hopefully will help us to do that, and then we'll sort of reevaluate after we've all had a chance to lead, and then sort of see. And the other thing we like to do is not only it's not good if it's too intense, right? Like if you dread it, and if it's like, oh God, I just don't have the energy to. I mean, sometimes that happens. I don't have the energy to go there in my mind. I'm just done. So we like to keep it light. Sometimes, we tell jokes. We bring a joke.
That's
Yeah,
good. You keep it
we tell
well, right?
funny
Yeah.
stories. No, we also we've done. I mean, if it wasn't for COVID, we would do a lot more in person. We've played disc golf. There's a disc golf course here where it's like frisbee, but it's with discs. We've done. We've Some of us have been swimming together in the ocean. We did one night before COVID. We rented a room at the local community center. And we did these like games, like sort of like wrestling, not wrestling, but like sort of these physical games. And that was like where you grab your foot and your hand and you try to make like a wheel, and you know what I mean. And it was hilarious. Some of us were terrible, and also like hacky sack. One of the men is really good at
Oh yes. Yeah. Okay.
the worst at hacky sack. Also, we've shared music. Like some of us do a lot of music, and for some of us, music is like a huge fear. Like sharing singing is like a big
Yeah.
real vulnerability for some of the men, and others it's pretty comfortable, right? So we'll do like a song. We'll just share a song, and other times we'll share something else that is harder for others. So yeah, so we try not to keep it super intense every single time, because then that can be just a bit too much, right? So it's a
Yeah.
constant process, and that's another reason why not having people come in and out is good, because you really get a sense of knowing,
True.
right? And you don't want to have to start all over again. I mean, we actually considered sort of inviting some more men in the group at one point when we were down to 5, but we decided that it's not worth it. And when you get to have more than 7 or 8, then you just don't have the time really for each person to have an opportunity to participate. So really 6 to 8 seems to be the perfect number.
And is there something that has or still maybe is surprising you the most, maybe like after starting this group and now being in it for a year and a half?
Well, I'm surprised that it still exists. I did not.
Yeah, that's super cool.
Surprising that not only does it exist, but the same men that started are still involved and still willing to commit that time. I'm surprised. It's surprising that some of the topics. I guess one of the things is how similar we are. Once you start sharing about the challenges and really, excuse me, how similar our challenges often are, and yet we don't talk about them in our normal lives. Another surprise is the depth of knowledge. Some of the men are far more knowledgeable than me about the sort of the ideas behind it. I mean, some of them have so many years of knowledge about meditation and Buddhism and different spiritual traditions and health and men's sort of some of the more concerned. Like in some ways, I'm not really a very good person to interview for this, because I just don't have the depth of maybe of anthropological understanding that some others do. But I can talk about my experience. But anyway, there's a lot, and then there's also quite a range of age, like probably from sort of 30s to 60s. So that's quite a range. So, one man is a grandfather and he's dealing with his grandchildren and his son-in-law, and others are married, and others have young kids, and some of us have older kids. And so just that sort of that variety of life experience is really great. I mean, yeah, we could even have more variety. I would say we don't have a huge amount of cultural diversity in our group at the moment, so that's something that we need to have. But and then another thing that was surprising is how hard it is for men to accept praise.
Interesting. Yeah.
Not something that we're comfortable with. So once in a while, we'll just do a thing where we just basically give praise and just appreciate each other and say positive things. And it's really uncomfortable, and that may not just be men, but it's certainly something that we don't typically do
Mm-hmm.
outside of a professional environment. And also another surprise is how long it's taking to create that sense of trust. Like, you'd think that after a year and a half of exercises and getting to know each other and meeting every week, but it's still not necessarily there. To go to those places where you share personal stuff, things in your mind, it's not easy even still. So that's a surprise, but how hard it is to. I mean, some of us are better at that than others. Some of the men are more courageous and really open about stuff more than others, but it's hard. It's really hard to do, and even after the time we've had together.
Thank you so much. I love all the information you shared. Really cool insights and very informative. And to wrap it up, if you would say one thing to the men out there, what would that be? That might be hard, but
well, I guess don't be afraid to find, or maybe not don't be afraid, but it's worth it to go deeper and have a relationship or multiple relationships where you can talk about what's on your mind beyond what is socially acceptable. Find some people that you feel safe with, and be explicit, be intentional about it. It's not just going to happen. It's like any relationship, right? I mean, you're not going to go to those places like what last time when Niki and I was speaking with you. If you don't have a check-in, if you don't have a time that's explicitly for talking about difficult topics, you're just not going to go there. It's just, it's too uncomfortable. And yet the payoff is so great. So I'd say the same thing, like try to find someone that and preferably a man, because it's just different when you talk to a woman. Find a man that you can talk to and maybe just say, look, I'd like to take this relationship to of course that doesn't sound right. Take this relationship to another level. But I'd like to be able to talk with you about more stuff. And how do you feel about that? And do you feel comfortable with that? And we trust each other to talk about personal things and not to share that, just that sort of thing. And I'd say it's worth having a friendship like that. And or I'd say to other men, like, look for a men's group, see if there's something out there. There are men's groups that are more like ours is not public. We don't really, like I said, look for more men. Like we don't want more men in our group, but there are groups that are more public and meet up and that sort of thing. And that might be a beginning, a first step to sort of, or go to a week. Another thing I'd say is maybe go on a retreat, because unless you've sort of done that thing where you sort of pull the veneer away and say, okay, look, we all have this mask. Unless you can get to the place where you realize that this mask exists, you won't even know that it's there. It's like we're all looking through this veneer and this curtain. And if you try to tell a man that this curtain is there, they'll say, no, it's not. This is just me. I'm just being honest with you. This is who I am. And it takes a challenge to even see that that's not true. That there is a filter that we all work through. And so going to some sort of a retreat or workshop where you can really sort of pull that away, that's pretty important, because otherwise it's really hard to even recognize that a group like this is important.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That's a really good message to finish off. Thank you for being here on the Life Creation podcast again. And we'll put those books you mentioned into the show notes. So thank you, Eric.
Good. Thanks so much, Andrina. It was fun.
Once again, after this talk, I wish I would have more opportunities to sit with Eric and talk more about life and pick his brain about relationship, men, music, pretty much just everything. The links to the books he mentioned, as well as the episode with him and Niki, are in the show notes. I really encourage you to share this episode with the men and women in your life so that we all can curate our life to the most beautiful artwork it deserves to be. Thank you so much for being here and for tuning in. Until next week.